Hello, and welcome to the Prevent and Perform podcast, episode 4. So, obviously, we haven't released an episode for a few weeks, but today we are back with a bang. My guest today is UFC fighter Nathan Fletcher. Thank you for coming on, Nathan.
Thank you very much for having me on, brother.
Perfect.
Appreciate it.
So, obviously, we went to school together. That's a long time ago now,
Yeah.
and you've achieved a lot in that time. But firstly, before we go into that, I want to know about you before the fighting career. How did it all start? Where was there anything beforehand? Any sports before you went into fighting?
Yeah, definitely. As a kid, I was always I tried my hand at a few sports. Do you know what I mean? Gymnastics was one that I always mention in interviews and stuff, talking about what got me into like athletics and sports. I played a bit of football like any kid, but I wasn't very good. So I quickly packed that in when I got into secondary school, probably. But I tried a lot of sports. Gymnastics probably being the main one as a kid. Footy, tried a bit of tennis. I was just saying before we started recording, I didn't play golf, and I'm trying to get into that now. So I wish I had played golf as a kid, but it is what it is. I'm trying to learn now. But yeah, I was definitely quite sporty as a kid.
So just going into gymnastics a little bit more, how do you think that did help you further down the line? Do you think it did?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
I think gymnastics is a great base for any sport because it gives you control over your body.
Yeah.
So especially my sport now, fighting, you're trying to control another person's body, their movement, and especially in the grappling elements of mixed martial arts. I think the core strength, the flexibility, all that body control that you get from gymnastics, I think that transfers over really well into MMA. But I think for any sport, like if I was to bring a kid up now and want him to go on to be a professional athlete, I'd start him in gymnastics before anything else.
Wow.
Because I feel like it gives you that balance, flexibility, control, explosiveness. There's a lot of physical attributes you can gain from doing gymnastics that I think transfers into a lot of other sports.
Brilliant. So you're really grateful to your parents for that one?
Yeah, definitely. At the time, probably not. I probably used to cry and sulk and not want to go. But I did. And you know what? I didn't even do a great deal of it. I probably did it seriously for a couple of years. There's a thing called the development squad, and then it goes into the competition class. So my younger brother Harvey, he stayed on it and he did the comp squad. That's where like a lot of the elite gymnasts come through, like your Daniel Purvises, people like that, who go on to obviously become Olympians. Yeah. But I did a development squad, and then I stopped. My older brother George was doing it as well, and I remember my parents telling me he wanted to quit, and I wouldn't go if he wouldn't go with me. So I stopped going because of that. And then later on, maybe like 10, 11, 12, we went back to it on more like a casual setting, like once a week, train there. But there's loads of people around Southport doing things in fitness now, like Sean Doran, Andy Wilson, obviously my brother George, still with his gym. They all met at gymnastics.
Wow.
So it was good like base for people going forward into like athletic careers, I feel
and
like.
They have really gone on to do good things with Terra over there, yeah.
Yeah, shout out Terra.
Oh, brilliant, love it. Perfect. So obviously then after that kind of part of your life, you went to school, went to high school.
Yeah.
And then that's where MMA started.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you think of school as quite important in that.
Yeah.
Why do you think so?
If I think back now, the reason I got into martial arts was probably because nobody in my family did martial arts. It wasn't like a background thing when my dad did it or any granddads or anything like that.
No.
I remember being in school and being relatively small. I was one of the smaller kids, and obviously in Birkdale we were in an all boys school. So there's a few elements at play. I think one thing was just wanting to be able to defend myself. And I've said this before in other interviews. Like I was never necessarily bullied or anything or picked on, but I was always aware of conflict around me, and I'd see maybe some of the older boys fighting, and that put a little bit of fear in me. And I was like, well, what if I get into an altercation like that?
Yeah.
I'm quite small. I need to be able to at least know some techniques to defend myself. So that was kind of what got me interested in it. And then I met our good friend Kieran Lovelady, and I started becoming quite pally with him. And at the time, Kieran was probably known as like the hard kid in school. He'd done a bit of training. He had an older brother in Aaron who had been training at the dog pit for years before that. So Kieran was like well respected within the year.
You can't argue with that, can you?
No, you definitely can't argue with that. So yeah, at the time I probably looked a bit up to Kieran and was like, right, okay, I want to do a bit of what he does because he's hard as nails. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Key took me down to the dog pit. Now, just before that, I had tried like a boxing class in Ormskirk, or I think it was Ormskirk. I went to a boxing class, and maybe I tried like a little bit of karate years before that, but nothing like concrete. And then it was in year 9. I went down to the dog pit, which is a local gym with Kieran, and instantly was hooked. Just fell in love with fighting at that point, and that became my obsession. And like all the other sports that I was kind of trying my hand at and not being very successful at, I kind of just swerved them and put all my focus into fighting at that age of like 13 or 14.
Yeah. So the dog pit to me sounds like quite an old-fashioned place. Is that what it was?
Yeah, pretty old school. Yeah.
Yeah, quite a rough kind of environment. Like learning the hard way kind of thing, getting thrown in the deep end.
Yeah, you could say that, yeah.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
think at the time, MMA is a relatively new sport. So today, like the gym I'm training at now, Next Generation, we're very by the book, very scientific. There's a lot more knowledge to play with. So the sport is getting a lot more advanced. But back in that day when I started, probably 2011, 2012, it was relatively an unknown. So people were just kind of training the way they thought was best. So people had all different methods. And obviously, Paddy, the coach there, was pretty old school. You know, he was a tough guy as well. So you went in, we got beasted every session. And it was like, you're training hard, you're becoming a machine. And that's the way we're doing it. There was no real thought of like rest recovery, all this type of stuff. It was just like, go, balls to the
but
wall.
the progress was quick.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say so.
Perfect. So Nathan, I'd love to go into the team behind the fighter. Obviously, we're all aware that you do have quite a big team around you.
Yeah.
But who would you say has been most important along the journey?
Most important is a tough one. I mean, obviously, I'd have to give credit to my head coach, Paul Rimmer. He's sort of like the main man that runs the ship at Next Gen, and everything trickles down from him. So I'd have to obviously give him credit for that. But it's a complete team effort from all the coaches to my training partners, and the team's just getting bigger and bigger, and we're evolving each year. So now we've got a pool of guys where I think we've got potentially 20 of the best pro fighters in the country all on our mats every day. And a lot of them are around my weight class as well. So I think I would say from lightweight and below, so 70 kilos and below down to my weight and even flyweight below me, we've got like the most competitive high level mat of fighters in the United Kingdom. And then I think now that's spanning to maybe even European level and worldwide. You see him with the likes of my teammates, Paddy. He's ranked maybe 6th now in the world. We've got myself in the UFC, which is the top organisation in the sport. Luke Riley, my other teammate, has just been signed. Shamrock, another one of my teammates, just been signed. Liam Gittins, who's a Cage Warriors bantamweight champion, now signed with the PFL. So the list goes on and on and on. We've got a massive team, and that saying, iron sharpens iron, is really applicable to us. I feel like every day I'm going in and being challenged by some of the best fighters in the country, and it's just causing me to grow, and same with me and them. We're just building each other up.
Perfect. So do you think that was instrumental behind the good Cage Warriors record that you had of 7 wins and just 1 defeat?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I think 7-1. I was 8-1 on Cage Warriors, I think.
You actually?
I'm sure I was,
okay.
Ben. Yeah.
My research has gone slightly wrong there.
It's all right.
But we'll roll with it.
I'm sure I was. Yeah, 8-1 I was on Cage Warriors. But yeah, again, I've been with Next Gen since I started out my journey at the dog pit, but then from about 18, when I started competing and fighting, I've been at Next Generation. So that team has been massive in my development as a fighter. Yeah. And it's safe to say I wouldn't be the athlete or the fighter I am today without having gone to Next Gen.
Perfect. And then at what point did S&C come into things, strength and conditioning? Would you say that has been there most of your journey, or is that more recent?
Yeah, for me, S&C's always been a part of something I've done. Like I said, going back to starting out in gymnastics, that in itself is a sort of strength and conditioning because you're strengthening your body through different movements, bodyweight exercises. So I've always had an interest for that side of sports. Even as a teenager, when I was getting into the dog pit, I was doing a little bit of bodybuilding alongside my brother George, who was big into his weight training at the time. So that element of the sport has always intrigued me. Now, obviously, throughout the years, I've become a bit more knowledgeable and I've started putting my efforts into more specific areas of strength and conditioning that will benefit me as a fighter as opposed to just me as an all-round athlete. So I'd say that like that's been a bit of a journey that I've been on, and I've tried my hands at loads of different things. I'm now trying to like fine tune what I think is the most applicable and cut away a lot of the stuff that's useless for fighting. But
yeah, would you say that? So obviously the different aspects of MMA, grappling, striking, would you say they require different exercises, different kind of plans in terms of S&C to improve each aspect? Yeah,
1,000,000%. Yeah, it's definitely different energy systems that get used. For example, like if you're doing a lot of grappling strength, grappling endurance, it's more. Oh, you want to do higher rep stuff, maybe some isometrics as well to build that like static strength that you need for grappling. Whereas striking's a lot more explosive, fast twitch, trying to be quick, get in, get out. So there's definitely like a whole array of different exercises you can do because MMA is one of those sports where there's so many different styles and energy systems that get used in a fight. So you've got to try and like cover all bases, and then going deeper on that, look at what type of fighter you are. So I'm more of a grappling, relentless pace fighter. So then my S&C needs to look different to somebody who's probably more of like a stick and move boxer on the back foot. They're going to be working different attributes to what I want to be working in order to make our game plan successful. Does that make sense?
So would that mean that your plans might be a little bit more energetic, a little bit more explosive, and then in terms of like recovery, would you need longer in between, do you think, compared to a fighter that might not be as explosive as yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. Potentially, heavy training like explosive power. Now, I'm not a sports scientist, so I'm not 100% clued up. We have coaches for that. I have a guy called Paul Reed who I go and see, who plans out all of our training for the strength conditioning aspects. And also, my brother George is somebody who I take a lot of advice from because he's a personal trainer and he's big into all different types of athletic training. So I just kind of like get prescribed what I need to do and go and do it. But I have got an interest in it, and I can kind of understand the different variables of what I need to focus on to build certain attributes. That makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah.